So welcome everybody to the last talk of this workshop, which will be given by Finlay Malcolm, who joins us digitally, and Chris Ranalli, who is present here at the FU. Let me introduce our last speakers. So Finlay is a research fellow in philosophy at the University of Hertfordshire and an affiliate member of the Extreme Beliefs Project. And his primary research interests are religious, social, and political epistemology, and in particular the nature of rationality of religious faith and trust, the role of knowledge in democracy, and the ethics of trusting the testimony of others. And Chris is a postdoc researcher within the Extreme Beliefs Project and currently working on indoctrination and extremism. And Chris' research interests lie with political epistemology and its application, the interaction between epistemology, philosophy of mind, and moral philosophy. And today they will speak about the epistemology of echo chambers. Well, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yes? Yeah. Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
Okay. So this is very unusual, presenting, collaboratively with Chris, with such distance between us. But yeah, we'll do our best. So this paper is about what is bad or possibly good with echo chambers from an epistemic point of view, so thinking about it in terms of our relationship to knowledge and true belief. And I think in general people think about echo chambers as something that's bad. So like a lot of social psychology says that these are bad things. So for instance, they maybe facilitate confirmation bias or make us overconfident or polarize us in different ways. But there's been a little bit of dispute about this in epistemology because some people say, look, they're not always problematic. In some ways, echo chambers might actually protect our knowledge. So for instance, you might have an echo chamber that always affirms climate change, then aren't you living in a kind of good echo chamber? So we're actually going to push back against that view. We're going to sort of say that echo chambers are always bad, but maybe some are just worse than others. So this is a little bit different than the other papers that have been presented at the workshop. So, but it does have a relevance to the theme of extreme beliefs. So my own research on fundamentalism explores how fundamentalist beliefs are cultivated in kind of insular echo chamber-like environments. And Chris, his work is on indoctrination and also the kind of echo chamber-like component to indoctrination as well. So we're trying to understand how echo chambers sit behind fundamentalist belief and indoctrination. So yeah, it's in service to that wider goal in the way that we're looking at this topic. So here's what we're going to do, and I should just say that this is very much a work in progress, and it's changing. It's quite dynamic at the moment. Even some of the labels we've been toying with recently. But what we're going to first do is just outline a kind of puzzling view about echo chambers, and then look at two broad approaches to resolving this puzzle, kind of what we call the right inputs and right processes view, and then a structural view. And we think that the failings of these views point in the direction of another account, an account that we're going to develop in section 4, what we call the reason undermining view. Okay, so we think that there's two, so we're going to try and define what echo chambers are. So we think there's two main features to echo chambers. So the first is what we call echoing. So with echoing, what happens is in a kind of informational network, some information will be distributed, and that information, the content of that information will match the beliefs of the members who are already within the echo chamber. So its informational content, its propositional content will match the beliefs of the members within it. And then there's blocking. So blocking, if the information tries to come into a network that's disconsonant with members' beliefs, then it's filtered out, it's prevented from getting in. So just to explore this through some examples. So this we call climate change denier. So the climate change denier believes that the climate is not changing. And so all of the informational sources she consults just deny climate change. So whether this is newspapers, whether it's a social media feed, personal networks, friendships, and the people she talks to, all of that, the information she gets from there agrees that the climate is not changing. And conversely, you've got climate change affirmer, so this person believes the climate is changing. And again, so the informational sources that she consults, they agree that the climate is changing. So whether it's social media, news media, friendships, those types of things. And these examples exhibit those properties of blocking and echoing. Okay. So is it a bad thing? These two people are in echo chambers. What's so bad about this? So we hear lots about echo chambers through different popular magazines. You know, they tell us to avoid echo chambers, we should try and break free from them. And work in social psychology in particular tells us that they're bad in different ways. So maybe they make us more tribal in a way that we can't escape from. This polarizes us on social media. And particularly the psychological effects, if you're only getting one side of the debate, you might become biased in different ways. So you might get my side bias. You might end up just having confirmation bias, and you might end up with too much self-confidence in your own view because you're not getting both sides of the debate. So there's a sort of strong intuition that echo chambers are not good. But other people think, well, it depends. It depends. Actually, sometimes they could be fine. So what if they are able to protect our true beliefs, prevent us considering false beliefs, and in that way help us hold on to knowledge, perhaps? So here's how it's put in a recent article by Jennifer Lackey. So she says, if I consult one highly reliable media outlet on a regular basis, I'll not only block out a lot of noise, I'll also end up forming lots of true beliefs about critical issues. If I add other sources simply to avoid worries about the insulation of beliefs without any regard for their reliability, I'll end up out of an echo chamber, but far worse off as a knower. For instance, if I learn about climate change from a reputable environmental scientist, there is only the danger of acquiring false beliefs in also consulting a climate change denier. So we think this gives us two conflicting intuitions. So the first, particularly those promoted by the kind of social psychology ideas, is a negative intuition. It just says that it's ceteris paribus epistemically bad to be in an echo chamber. Something that reinforces in-group beliefs and omits and undermines the credibility of out-group beliefs and sources. And our positive intuition, it's ceteris paribus epistemically good to be in a social network that reinforces true belief and prevents false belief. And they can sometimes facilitate this function. So what do we do about this puzzle? Which intuition do we go in the direction of? So we're going to present a few different options to resolving this and try and work out whether or not they're good or bad. So the first approach is just to say, look, not all echo chambers are epistemically bad, right? So we can, maybe the negative intuition just needs to be revised so that, they're often or quite often or sometimes they're not good, they're bad. And so we think the most straightforward approach to this is what we call a veritistic approach. So according to a veritistic approach, echo chambers are good if they result in more true beliefs, and they're bad if they result in more false beliefs. So fairly straightforward approach there. And we think that there's two approaches to a veritistic theory. So there's what we call the right inputs view, and then there's what we call the right processes view. So the right inputs view says roughly this. If the information fed into the network is true, then the echo chamber will be epistemically good. And this is the idea that we've pretty much taken from Lackey. So just going back to her article, she says, when I'm reading an article about the impact of climate change on wildlife, what is the benefit of clicking on a button to reveal the perspective of a climate change denier? Sure, I will be exposed to a different view, but at the expense of truth. But you can see the idea is, if the information that goes in is true, then we're in a good epistemic position. So we think that a helpful analogy here is with a clothing factory. So suppose you've got material going into a clothing factory. So that material can be of high quality. So it could be very high quality fabrics, the best quality dyes, whatever it is you use to make clothes. So if that's of really high quality, then the idea is that that'll go into the factory, and then what you ought to get on the other side is high quality clothing. So this is a little bit like putting good quality information into a network, an echo chamber. It's going to result in maybe more true beliefs. But there's this analogy reveals a problem, we think, with the right inputs view, which is just that there are other things needed in the factory to make sure that you end up with a good quality product on the other side. So, for instance, you need the staff to be trained well, you need the machinery to be of a good standard and to be operating correctly. So what we think is there's certain processes and mechanisms that need to be operative within the factory in order to also produce good quality clothes. So it's not just the quality of the materials we're putting in, it's also the processes within the factory as well. And so you can use this analogy to then go back to that, to the right inputs view and say it's maybe necessary but not sufficient. It also needs to be supplemented by what we can call the right process view. So the right process view says that if the process for belief formation within the chamber are good, then the chamber itself will be epistemically good, and if not, will be epistemically bad. So what kind of processes would be relevant to generating, to getting to true beliefs and knowledge? So this idea we're taking from a recent article by Elzinger, and what he actually focuses on bad processes. So bad processes, he say, are falsity conducive, and he focuses on two main kinds of falsity conducive process. So the first are features of the psychological profile of the agents who are actually within the echo chamber. So if the people within the echo chamber have cognitive biases, or if they're ignorant and have other epistemic biases, he thinks that that's going to be a bad process. And even if you put in true information, you can still end up with false beliefs. And the second area he focuses on is institutional or social mechanisms. So he looks at mainly like online, the type of terribly emotionally charged communication you have, failure to follow good norms of communication, social media algorithms that are problematic and maybe push you towards bad information, and personalized political advertisements. So those kind of things. So he thinks if there's these mechanisms, then you've got bad processes, and even if you've got some good information going in, you can still get false beliefs. And on the other side, you could just imagine what a truth-conducive process would look like. So just taking this from Elzinger and just considering the flip side, You've got maybe stable communication styles, virtuous social media algorithms, agents who have intellectual virtues. So that would then give us a kind of right processes view. So you just need the right mechanisms or processes in order to get to a kind of a healthy veritistic echo chain. Okay. So a combination of right inputs plus right processes, maybe taking them as both necessary and sufficient, would say something like this: that good echo chambers have true content and true conducive processes, and the bad ones have false content and or falsity conducive processes. I think you only need one of those to fail in order to have a bad echo chamber. So slightly higher bar to have a good echo chamber. But you can have a good echo chamber nonetheless. That's the kind of point. It's possible to have a good echo chamber. So we think that this combination is actually insufficient. It doesn't tell us everything about echo chambers in particular. We think that there's still properties that make them bad, even in the case of so-called good echo chambers. So just to begin to explore that, I'm going to kind of begin to explore it, and then Chris will take it up in a little bit more detail. I just want to introduce another example. So this is what we call commune, and it focuses on the character of Guinevere Turner. She's a real person. It's quite an interesting story, and so she grows up in an insular commune known as the Lyman family, and it completely closed itself off to outsiders, so it becomes completely geographically isolated, as well as isolated from other ideas, alternative ideas. The children like Guinevere, raised in the community, have been born into a belief system and simply accepted it, as children do. Outsider information that made its way into the community was filtered by the commune's charismatic leader, Mel Lyman, who amplified his own views. And in particular, young community members were raised to believe that they were going to live on Venus. And the sense from this view is not filtered in. Okay, so that's roughly what we're going off to believe. So, according to the kind of right inputs and right processes view, communes, what we're calling commune, and climate change denier, which we looked at earlier, are equally bad. They're equally bad echo chambers to be in, because they both lead to false beliefs. Right? So they've both got, so on a veritistic view, they're going to be equally bad because they both lead to false beliefs. They've both got wrong inputs because they've got false information, and they've both got wrong processes. So for instance, maybe that people are encouraged to be curious or to misplace their trust. But we think that commune is actually maybe better than climate change denier in two ways, and these two ways we think point us towards some other features of echo chambers that we need to take into account. So the first of these is that we actually think that in commune, people are, the echo chamber itself promotes the following of good norms, whereas climate change denier promotes the following of bad norms. So take this norm, for instance. There are others, but take this one. So you can call this available counter-evidence. So I think you should consider relevant available counter-evidence to your beliefs. It's a fairly uncontroversial norm. But note that in commune, it's so isolated that actually relevant counter-evidence is not available to the people who are kind of living within it. So they're able to satisfy this norm because there's no available counter-evidence for them. As climate change denier, they've actually got access to the relevant counter-evidence. But their echo chamber just tells them to kind of completely ignore that counter-evidence. There's something about the property of the echo chamber that's telling people to ignore relevant norms. And maybe a problem with some echo chambers that we need to talk more about is that they promote the kind of ignorance or non-consideration of relevant available counter-evidence. And we think this isn't really an issue of process, right? So it's not like biases within the echo chamber or algorithms pointing you in a certain way. And it's certainly not about inputs because there kind of aren't any inputs as such with this issue. I think this is maybe more something to do with the structure structure of the echo chamber. So that's one difference between the two. And the second point is that I actually think commune is, in certain ways, just not in any way able to improve itself. Whereas the kind of change denial echo chamber actually, and the people within it actually are able to change their situation, but just kind of refuse to. So there are some good things about commune, right? The people within it are kind of doing the best with the material they have. They're following norms, they're basing their beliefs on the evidence, they're trusting the only leaders that they have. But what's bad about it is it just has poor products. It's got nothing, it can't get itself to true beliefs because of the false information that's circulating within it. And it can't actually improve itself because it becomes so isolated from the rest of society. It's a little bit like, a factory that can just never ever bring in any better products, right? Because it just becomes so insulated. It can't buy in better dyes, it can't buy in better fabrics, or anything like that. So again, we think that we've got a problem here with structure, right? And that's just that some echo chambers just seem to block opportunities to actually enhance its epistemic or our epistemic position. And we think that actually, this point is actually going to apply to even echo chambers that have good inputs and good processes. That if they're going to block our way to enhance our epistemic position in certain ways, so for instance by being able to gather new evidence, to being able to share ideas with people on the outside, even if those ideas, even if other people hold they're bad ideas, to be able to understand the reasons that other people have, understand what's right and wrong with one's own reasons. This is just a little bit of a preview, but we think that this is something else that distinguishes commune from climate change denial, maybe makes just the kind of right inputs and right process view a little bit simplistic and insufficient. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Chris.
All right, so yeah, Finlay was pointing to the problem with the veritistic views, basically, and what was driving the veritistic view was just the idea that there can be both good and bad echo chambers, and the good ones are basically good because they take in good products, in this case, true, non-misleading information, and so it's likely that their outputs will also be true, non-misleading information, so you can kind of... Oh, I'm muted?
No, but on on Zoom, we can only see half of the slide.
Huh? Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, now we can see.
Okay, well... How about, what is it like now?
Same. Maybe just, oh yeah, now it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I don't know. I actually just clicked around. Okay, yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, so this takes us basically to the structural view, which says that there's something essentially wrong with echo chambers in general. So it doesn't really demarcate between epistemically good and epistemically bad echo chambers. Rather, all echo chambers are epistemically problematic in some way. So it effectively rejects this positive intuition, and it tries to pin the badness of echo chambers on the sort of social informational structure of echo chambers. So it's not really looking at information coming in or information going out, but how the information is used due to the structure of the social environments that constitute echo chambers. And we have a couple of representatives of this view in the literature, we think. So there's a sort of recent paper just out, 2020. So Avner says that echo chambering involves or constitutes some process of belief formation that is generally and reasonably recognized as a bad way to form beliefs. So the thought here is that would also apply to echo chambers which produce true beliefs. Even they have some epistemic defect. I mean, much earlier, Cass Sunstein is, of course, focusing on sort of the social political effects of echo chambers. But the way he's doing that still sort of refers to epistemically salient phenomena, and those are things like polarization and sort of social fragmentation. And we'll see how that bottoms out in an epistemic defect a bit later, which is effectively something like promoting my-side biased evaluation of beliefs. So the idea is that there's something fundamentally problematic with my-side biased evaluation of beliefs, and echo chambers necessarily facilitate that. Okay, so here's just returning to our factory analogy, which we very much like. So whereas before you could sort of have good products, so the green is supposed to represent good, so you might have good material coming in, and thus you have a good product coming out. And you might use that to assess a factory, right? You might say, okay, well, this is a good factory because there's good stuff coming in and so good stuff coming out. But you can also evaluate a factory based on its structure. And they have sort of a twofold structure. One is the decision structure, so from management down to the laborers, but also in the structure of how the products are actually made, right? So like if the laborers are using certain kinds of machinery, how are they operating the machinery, how are they communicating with each other, who's doing what kind of work, and so on. So if these two things are in some way bad, that'll lead to a negative evaluation of the factory, even independently of the stuff coming in and the stuff going out, right? So a factory with sort of structural problems can still sometimes produce good things. And it can still, of course, also reliably take in good things. So we're trying to transpose this idea onto echo chambers now. So basically, what were the structural features of echo chambers? Well, first there's echoing. And second, there is, oh, that went really fast. Yeah, there's echoing and then also blocking. So that's like blocking countervailing information from coming in. Okay, so this is basically then what we're going to focus on with the structural view. Echoing, what's bad about that feature? Well, essentially that it presents misleading higher order evidence. So that's kind of a technical term I need to introduce. And blocking, well, what blocking is essentially doing is driving my-side biased evaluation of insider beliefs, but also the outsider beliefs. Okay. So by echoing consonant beliefs, echo chambers essentially mislead group members into believing that they have much more evidence for their in-group beliefs than they actually have. So that's supposed to be the epistemic problem here. So if you're in an echo chamber, because the consonant views are echoing, it seems to you as though you're getting lots of good feedback that the view is really well supported, because it seems as though it's being filtered independently through multiple people that are kind of like assessing and evaluating the view. And if they all say, yeah, this view is really likely to be true, the thought is like, well, this is kind of an evidential filter. So isn't that more evidence that our shared belief is actually correct? And the thought is like, well, no, and that's why it's misleading. Okay. And so why is that? Why is it going wrong? So Nguyen, in a recent episteme paper, says that this is due to the phenomenon of corroborative bootstrapping. So he says the mistake is to treat problematically dependently selected insiders as if they were independent and thus to overweigh their testimony. So again, the thought is that you're treating each of the in-group members as though they're independent evaluators of the belief when actually they're dependent. And by dependent, what that can mean sort of different things, but one way you can see dependence is something like in social media when people sort of just reshare a view or an article. And the thought is that they're not really independently evaluators, they're just sharing the same content. Okay. So it looks something like this then. If you had sort of independent testimony, that would be a good thing. So suppose one person says P, that gives some weight for P. Another person says P, that gives some weight for P. Another one, and so some more, and so on. But when it's non-independent, it looks as though it's sort of multiple people. But really, it's sort of all the same. It's either the same kind of evaluation, or it's mere sharing. And so you don't have multiple weights or sort of evidence for P, but what you really have is just one piece of evidence for P. So you're kind of like overweighing it, and that's what's misleading. That's the misleading higher order evidence. And so the idea is that, at least for kind of newer sorts of echo chambers, you see this in social media, but you can also see it in kind of more classical echo chambers, if we call it, where it's sort of socially, geographically, and informationally isolated groups that are just kind of like sort of outside of society, and not letting in insiders and not taking in outsider testimony. Okay, so one challenge for this way of thinking about it, however, is that structurally echo chambers, they can function by repeating and reinforcing in-group beliefs, but the epistemic goodness, badness of the echo chamber will partly be a matter of whether there are mostly sharers or evaluators. So that will just depend on which echo chamber we're talking about, right? So an evaluator is someone who is getting their source from one information source, but they are still evaluating that source, and so the information. Whereas a sharer, they're getting their information from one source, and then they just share it, and then the other person shares it, doesn't evaluate it, and then the next person shares that, and so on down the chain. So here would be kind of the analogy. With the evaluators, you have the one source, right? So here you have let's say this is the climate change affirming echo chamber, and you have the one source, which is something like, let's say, the journal Nature. And so the evaluators, they all independently evaluate the same source. And so the thought was, well, maybe that does still lend individual weight to the claim. But in a sharing sort of situation, although one person is getting it from a reliable source, in this case, the journal Nature, that person just shares it, and then so does the next one and the next one and the next one. And so you just have the one weight and not the multiple weights for the claim. Okay. So the basic problem here then is just that whether misleading higher order evidence is actually present will really just depend upon which echo chamber we're talking about. Are we talking about one with mostly sharers, or are we talking about one with mostly evaluators? Of course, there will also be unclear, vague cases. Okay, let's go to blocking then. So perhaps blocking is what's essentially epistemically problematic with echo chambers. I mean, after all, intuitively there's something bad about systematically failing to take in countervailing voices, countervailing information. There's something intuitively bad about that. But what is it exactly? One thought is that it yields my-side biased evaluation of your own beliefs, and also of the outsider beliefs that you are aware of. Which can lead, of course, also to polarization, but here we're focusing more on things like cognitive polarization, where that means what the in-group thinks about the out-group vis-a-vis their beliefs. So it's not effective, it's not about how they feel about the out-group, and it's not practical how they treat the out-group. It's more about how they evaluate the out-group's reasoning, thinking, or believing. Okay, so what then is problematic about the echo chambers sort of facilitating the my-side bias? Well, the thought here is that my side bias is sort of disconnected from epistemic reasons for believing, and it's more or less connected to non-epistemic interests.
Chris, just very briefly, there's like 20 minutes left, so I don't know how much time we want to leave for questions.
Oh, okay.
So you're aware.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So basically, with my side bias, the idea is something like, well, you have a tendency to sort of look sort of approvingly upon evidence that supports your beliefs, and then disapprovingly upon evidence which doesn't, or even sometimes to ignore the countervailing information, right? Because you kind of preemptively think, well, there's no reason to look at this because it's misleading. So what's driving your evaluation here is not really a concern for the epistemic or truth or being rational or getting things right, but it's something like the goal of keeping your group together, of saving face, of perhaps maintaining the integrity of your values or something like that. But it's not really an epistemic motive, but a non-epistemic one. And because it's a non-epistemic motive, the thought is like, well, then it's not really reliable. And if it's not really reliable, then that kind of undercuts the evaluation, that undercuts the belief. And if that's occurring in all echo chambers, then that's an epistemically bad-making feature of them. Okay. What is sort of problematic about this view, however, is when you start thinking about what's actually epistemically bad about my side bias, as soon as you start connecting it to something like how reliable it makes you evaluate your own beliefs and also other people's beliefs, that brings truth back into the picture, right? So our worry about this view is while it seems like a structural view, it also seems like a veritistic view in the sense that it's bringing truth in through the back door. So in essence, then, what really is making an echo chamber epistemically good or bad is just whether or not it's facilitating accurate evaluations of beliefs, namely your own beliefs and outsiders' beliefs. If it's not doing that, then it's bad, and if it is, then perhaps it's good. So it seems like it's kind of a stealthy form of veritism. It's smuggling it in through the back door. So our assessment of this view is like, well, perhaps it's not really a structural view after all, and it's really just veritism again. So we're kind of back to square one, our original puzzle. And that leaves us with our own position. So our own position is sort of we're still trying to figure this out, but it seems to us like it is kind of a structural view. We say that echo chambers are epistemically bad, all of them, because they undermine the members' ability to acquire, enhance, and understand the reasons for their positions and against the contrary positions. So basically, if I had a slogan for this, it makes the members reason deaf. Like they're just not good at, they're just not sensitive to reasons. And it goes in two directions. They're not sensitive to the reasons for their own positions, and they're also not sensitive to the reasons for the outsider or countervailing contrary positions. At best, if they are sort of sensitive to reasons for their own reasons to the outsider positions, it's sort of in an inauthentic, scripted way. So it would be something like, if you can sort of search for things like, how to respond to the atheist arguments, right? And the idea is it's sort of for fundamentalists to kind of just internalize and remember, so that if they were to encounter an atheist, they can just kind of quickly go to the template and respond. It might look like a rational process on the surface, but the idea is that they're not really understanding the arguments. And they don't really understand why those arguments, if they're sound, really do refute the contrary position. They're really just using it as a template, so just as a kind of tool in an inauthentic way. So it's not really a manifestation of their rationality, but an expression of sort of inauthenticity or even inauthentic rationality, kind of a ringer for rationality. Okay, back to our own position. So we think the problem with the echo chambers is that even the people in the echo chamber, they can't appreciate the reasons for their own position. So this will also apply to sort of truth-conducive echo chambers, right? So the thought is like the more time you spend inside an echo chamber, even if you have correct, accurate beliefs, it's going to stunt your ability to kind of defend those beliefs, because you're sort of surrounded by like-minded individuals who are just echoing the position and also blocking the arguments against it, that you're not going to be able to even defend it from those counter arguments, because either you're not even taking them in, or if you are taking them in, it's kind of just to sort of demonize it, or at best to appeal to some kind of template. It's not really appreciating any sort of reasons against the position. So that's the basic idea, and here's just kind of a summary. All echo chambers undermine their members' reasons responsiveness. So even truth-conducive echo chambers are epistemically harmful to that extent. And how does it undermine members' reason? Well, inability to defend in-group beliefs from defeaters or counter-arguments, inability to recognize salient defeaters, inability to understand or explain why competitor positions are false, or why contrary arguments are fallacious, why contrary evidence is misleading. And at best, if they do engage in such projects, then it's in an inauthentic template sort of way. And the downstream practical effect is this promotes othering, kind of seeing the other person as not even a reasonable, rational agent, and that just seems politically bad, but also epistemically bad. You're not really seeing them anymore as an epistemic agent. And perhaps in a weird twist, by being in an echo chamber, it's sort of reducing your own epistemic agency, right? So that also seems bad. Okay, I think I'll stop here and just leave the upshots away and just leave it with the questions and implications for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.